What happens when the soldiers of the Great War become storytellers? Between 1918 and 1933, German veterans turned their battlefield memories into gripping war novels. Some glorifying combat, others condemning it. But how did these books work to shape the nation's memory of World War I? Let's dive into the literary battlefield of Weimar Germany. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany was a nation searching for meaning. The war had shattered all certainties, leaving behind a generation of soldiers grappling with their experiences. Some of them turned to writing, creating novels that ranged from raw, unfiltered depictions of the trenches to patriotic tales justifying the war's sacrifices. Some, like Erich Maria Remarque's Au Kreuz on the Western Front, became international sensations, while others were embraced by nationalist movements, eager to rewrite history. But these books were more than just literature. They were political statements, cultural battlegrounds, and reflections of a fractured society. In this video, we'll explore how war novels shaped the remembrance of war in the Weimar Republic and roughly how that worked. After the military conflict ended, a battle over interpretation immediately began in Germany and Austria. This struggle involved not only politicians, generals, diplomats, and historians, but also a large number of writers in various forms. It became a fight over memory, historical truth, future-oriented meaning, and modes of representation. Diverse experiences sought recognition in the collective memory and aimed to shape the image of what was initially called the Great War. At the same time, the war's truth, as both a historical event with many facets that needed proper illumination and as a deeply personal human experience, had to be negotiated through communication. The war's significance for the future was also crucial, and the question of how to represent it was highly contentious. This debate revolved around finding the most appropriate, correct, valid, or true literary form to capture the war's reality. First, let us have a look at the numbers and the phases in which the books were published. Between the years 1919 and 1932, around 2,390 titles were published, but these include war books of every kind, not only the novels. Depending on where we draw a line for the novels, around 670 war novels were published in that period. Putting these numbers a bit in context, it shows that the war novels were not a huge part of the literary market. In 1925, for example, 31,595 books were published and around 6,000 of them were novels. Regarding the development of literature about the Great War, even contemporary observers noticed a certain division, which later literary research confirmed. This division aligns with the three phases of the Weimar Republic. During the Revolution and founding phase, 1918 to 1923, many memoirs with apologetic and war-affirming perspectives were published, alongside pacifist works. In the consolidation phase, 1924 to 1927, interest in war literature declined. By May 1929, journalist Hermann Kesser noted that around 1924, theater directors, art entrepreneurs, and critics had declared an end to political, militant content in literature, and the word war was systematically removed from programs. However, this changed in 1928, 10 years after the war's end, when a new wave of remembrance began. One of the main reasons for this was Remarque's Au Kreuz on the Western Front, and the meaning this book conveyed, which could not be accepted by a lot of other authors. Shortly afterward, amid the Great Depression and growing political polarization, war once again became a central topic of public debate. Let's have a quick but detailed look at the numbers of the published war novels during this period, just to clarify my previous statement. As we can observe, previous to 1928, the numbers of publications of war novels were pretty low. The lowest in 1923 with 6 books, while the peak was in 1919 with 47 novels published right after the war. In the rest of the years, it was between 16 and 35, but mostly somewhere around 20-something published novels. However, in the end of 1928 and the start of 1929, there was a significant change, since the numbers of the publications tripled and reached its peak in 1930 with 115. So we can clearly see how big the impact of Remarque's novel was. It changed the whole genre of war novels. Now, looking at the numbers a bit closer and referring to research, we can put these into 2 phases and follow the research about it. That would be 2 phases in which we can observe a shift of the perspective. The shift in perspective in war literature between 1915 and 1930 from the viewpoint of pilots or generals to that of infantry soldiers strongly reflects the changing social background of the authors. An analysis of bestseller lists shows that the early publications of traditional authors and mostly highly ranked officers can be classified as part of the old interpretive elite. Among the authors of bourgeois and lower middle class origin, who were more on the pacifist side. Only Erich Maria Remarque's book, written by a soldier climber, became a bestseller. In contrast, the group of the ballistic authors, with a broadly diverse social background, shows greater variety. 5 bestsellers were written by bourgeois authors, 3 by authors from lower social backgrounds, and 4 by authors who experienced social decline. This demonstrates that the social shift among authors is closely linked to the increasingly preference for the infantry perspective in war literature. As war literature evolved alongside the shifting political and social landscape of the Weimar Republic, it played a crucial role in shaping collective identity. The memory of the war, whether framed as a heroic sacrifice, a tragic mistake, or a national betrayal, became central to how Germans understood themselves and their shared past. Competing narratives sought to define this identity. Nationalist and conservative voices aimed to preserve a sense of honor and continuity, while pacifist and critical perspectives questioned the very foundations of militarism and war. At the heart of the struggle was the paradox of experience. Experience is both an immediate, deeply personal encounter with reality and something that requires interpretation to gain meaning. In other words, it is always already an interpretation and a need of interpretation. The soldiers' first-hand accounts of the war were not neutral recollections, but shaped by memory, ideology, and the demands of the time in which they were written. Yet, these individual war experiences did not exist in isolation. They were aimed within collective memory, a dynamic and evolving framework through which societies remember and make sense of the past. Additionally, the reception of the book by the reader is important too. That means that the reader has his own view, experiences, and ideas which he transfers into the text. So the original meaning or goal by the author can be altered to something completely different, or even something to the opposite. Meaning, a novel with pacifist tendencies could be read as an adventure or even a ballistic novel, depending on who sees what in the story and what the person takes out of it. Collective memory does not simply preserve history, it reconstructs it in ways that serve contemporary needs. In the post-war years, the Weimar Republic witnessed intense struggles over how the war should be remembered. Literature became a key medium through which different factions attempted to assert their version of the past. In the mid-1920s, a temporary decline in war literature reflected a broader societal push to move forward, but the resurgence of war novels in 1928 demonstrated that the memory of the war remained unresolved. Moreover, war literature also served a symbolic compensatory function. As political and military authority declined after the war, the literary field became a space where former soldiers, intellectuals, and ideologues sought to reclaim lost symbolic capital. The struggle over war narratives was not just a cultural phenomenon, but a continuation of political conflict by other means, a transformation of civil strife into a battle over representation in literature. As the economic and political crisis deepened, the war became a symbolic battleground for competing ideologies. Literature was not merely a record of past events, it was an active force in shaping collective identity by mediating between personal experiences, historical narratives, and the ongoing reconstruction of collective memory. Another thing that is to keep in mind is the tension between the autobiographical and fiction novels, and all of them in between, since the autobiographical usually claim to tell the truth, while always having some fictional elements or episodes with them. War literature isn't just about battles, it's about perspective. Depending on the branch of the military, the experience of war was completely different. And that's reflected in the novels. So let's break it down. Infantry, the heart of war stories. Most war novels focus on infantrymen. And for good reason. They made up the vast majority of soldiers. Two major themes dominate these stories. First, the brutal personal nature of combat, looking your enemy in the eye before pulling the trigger, and living with that burden. Second, the unbreakable bond of comradeship. Life in the trenches was hell, and survival depended on the men next to you. That's why so many infantry novels are actually group novels, emphasizing brotherhood in the face of chaos. The two today most known are on the one hand War Quiet on the Western Front by Remarque and Storm of Steel by Jünger. Artillery, the power behind the front lines. Though less common, there are some incredible artillery novels. Higher Command by Elif Köppen, which I've already covered, is a standout, along with the German guns. 4 Years on the Western Front by Sulzbach. Artillery was devastatingly effective, but its role in literature is often overshadowed by the more personal close quarters combat of the infantry. Navy, the war beneath the waves. Naval warfare in the Weimar War literature mostly revolves around submarines. Tight spaces, high tension, and a constant battle for survival. That said, a few solid books focused on the fleet as well, capturing the unique challenges of war at sea, like the novel Des Kaisers Coolies by Plivier. Air Force, The Knights of the Sky. The Red Baron is the most famous, but plenty of novels cover the world of fighter pilots. Unlike the infantry, who were stuck in muddy trenches, pilots fought dramatic duels in the sky. It was a completely different war, fast, elegant, and deadly. Tanks, there are beasts. Tanks, not so much to say here. The Imperial German Army only had 20 of them, so there's basically no war literature about them, in contrast to the English. Cavalry, the Forgotten Warriors. Now, this is interesting and of course interests us the most. Cavalry novels do exist, but they're rare and hard to track down. I found 3 so far, one of which I'll be covering soon, so stay tuned. Medics and Priests, the unsung heroes. Even medics and military chaplains had their stories told. The Crossbearers by Fry is one of the most important, and surprisingly there are quite a few novels about priests who served in the military police in the war. So basically there's something to find for every branch of the army, whether it's the officers making the big decisions, the enlisted men in the trenches, or those who climbed up the ranks. Each of these perspectives brings a unique view of war, shaping how we understand history through literature, no matter where they served. These soldiers left behind stories worth telling and worth reading. This diversity of perspectives also lies into the theory of collective memory and experience. Each branch of the military presents a different facet of the war experience, contributing to the broader cultural narrative about what the war meant for the individual and for the nation. These varied accounts are not simply personal stories, they are a part of the ongoing process of interpretation and reconstruction within the collective memory. As literature grapples with these experiences, whether through the intimate bonds of infantry soldiers or the isolation of submariners, it shapes the collective identity of a nation still coming to terms with its past. War novels become, therefore, not just reflections of individual soldiers' experiences, but crucial elements in the larger battle over historical meaning, identity, and memory in post-war society for each of the political views. When it comes to war literature, it's not just about the battles, it's about the stories soldiers had to tell and how those stories shape the way a nation remembers its past. After World War I, German veterans turned to literature, not only to process their experiences, but to fight a battle over collective memory and identity. The infantryman's close quarter combat, the isolated tension of submariners, the fast-paced duels of fighter pilots, each branch of the military offered a unique lens on the war. These diverse perspectives weren't just personal stories, they were pieces of a much larger puzzle, a national reckoning with the trauma and the political chaos that followed the war. But here's where it gets interesting. These novels weren't just about individual soldiers' experiences, they were about how history would remember the war. Was it a noble cause, a tragic mistake, or a betrayal of the people? The way these books were written and received became part of a much bigger battle for meaning. In a country still reeling from political instability and economic crisis, how the war was remembered had real stakes. The literary field became a space to reclaim lost symbolic capital with different groups, using their stories to assert their version of history. The paradox of experience played a huge role in all of this. You see, every soldier's story wasn't just about what they went through, it was about how they made sense of what happened. War experiences were never just raw, unfiltered truth, they were always shaped by memory, ideology, and the context of the time. And that's what made them so powerful. These stories weren't static, they were always open to reinterpretation. In the end, these war novels weren't just books, they were battlegrounds. They were weapons in the fight over how Germany would remember the war, what it would mean for future generations, and what kind of nation it would become. So, the next time you pick up one of these books, remember, you're not just reading a soldier's story, you're diving into the heart of the nation's ongoing struggle to come to terms with its past. Have you read one of the German war novels? If so, which one? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. See you next time. Have a good one.